almost forgot my signature red glasses. Okay, so I set my timer to 5 minutes, but I think I'm going to go over 5 minutes today because I want to talk about web design. The reason I want to talk about that on my journal today is because I'm a web designer and I've had a few years where I think a lot of my friends didn't really know that I'm a web designer. And I think it would be interesting for me to capture the story of how I became a web designer and why I call myself a web designer now versus what I used to call myself when I started in design. So let me just recap this for anybody that's interested at all. But, I actually, the first website I ever made was when I was 18 years old, and there was no such thing as Squarespace, any of these kind of things available. I did it all in HTML, which I learned myself, super basic. I'm sure if I had the site now, it looked horrible and ridiculous, but that was my first site. 18 years old, I built like a kind of personal page. There was no Facebook, there was no MySpace, any of those things that came later. That was the first thing that I did. But at that time, I was working as a graphic designer. That's what I was going to school for right after high school. I started learning graphic design while I was in high school, actually. I did 11th and 12th grade. I had the option to join a program that was teaching graphic design in high school. So that's when I got involved with that. And of course, afterwards, I went to college. I studied uh, just design and marketing. That's what I got a degree in. And so then after school, I went into advertising, started working at an ad agency, mostly just design advertising projects. We're talking about like catalogs, in store materials, displays, ads, banners, billboards, packaging, yes, logos, brand elements, but at that time it was focused more on just like design as a thing and everything else fit in it. It wasn't until much later that I started working for a company here in Taiwan called Getchi, and started getting more involved in digital marketing. And at that time, digital marketing was kind of like a new buzzword. Not a lot of people were using it, but I did have to learn a lot about like marketing techniques and different things that was sort of out of my design scope at the time. After that, I started working here in Taiwan again for a brand strategy agency, DDG Taiwan. And there, the focus was heavily on brand strategy, communication strategy. Um, and of course, they have a huge design team, which I worked with. But I learned a lot about that. Um, and then after I left that agency, I wanted to be on my own, and so I started pitching myself as like a brand strategist or a digital marketer. But I found that the the easiest thing I could sell that people would actually pay me for were tangible assets like a website. And so I went back to getting into web design. Of course, I had a lot of skills already in my toolkit, right? I've already spent a decade plus as a designer. I went to school to learn design. I've at that point worked at many different agencies, advertising, branding, digital marketing. So it was easy for me to take all that and then get into just learning the technical skills that I needed to be a web designer. And I used many different tools, but currently I now focus almost completely on Webflow. I use that tool. I spend my time learning. I am part of, Webflow groups to increase my skills. become better at using the tool technically. But then, of course, I can leverage all my past design, uh, aesthetic, intuitive skills for web design. And it's worked out really well because something that I know about myself is that um, I love building. I love building things. You know, when I was working at the brand strategy agency, I didn't have an opportunity to build things as much as I'd like. It was mostly, thinking and brainstorming and creating presentations, this kind of work. And for me, that's okay, but just I think I've always been a designer at heart, which is closely connected to being an artist. And I feel like I fit in that sphere. So web design has been something really great for me. I love doing it because I get to use my design skills, but I also get to build something to be creative, meaning I create. And that's always been important to me. So, yeah, I think that captures who I am as a web designer. And I think this is a good post. But just to clarify something that I've talked a lot with people about, what that is to me, as a web designer, I am, there are web designers and designers in general that focus on being hyper creative, like the web designer or the designer that's going to just impress you, knock your socks off. With just like the most amazing creative, high level art or, like fancy animation, really visually outstanding impressiveness. Um, and and then there are those designers who are just completely technically focused. They're programmers, they're coders, they're really focused on being good at the back end things. These are people that are going to work for like Amazon, um, you know, apps that require a lot of technical know how and skill. And I feel like for me, I fit actually in this middle place where um, I focus on being just a solid designer. I care a lot about strong foundations, like well planned out, good, solid design that's not particularly trying to be impressive, but just works really well and is good and it's clean and it makes sense and it works for the product or the business that it's trying to serve. And that's where I've kind of found my place, my niche as a designer. Usually, if people ask me, I say I'm a web designer, but I'm also a brand designer. Brand designer means most of the projects I work on, I'm also doing like mini brand projects, visual identity systems. So yeah, colors, logos, typography, all those things that you need to then fulfill something like a website. That's what I'm doing too, because I have all of this experience with different agencies doing that kind of work. And so, that's, uh, I don't know, I think it's like important for myself to be able to clarify that for people. Like, when I say I'm a web designer, I need people to know what that means. It doesn't mean that I'm doing Photoshop work, and it doesn't mean that I'm creating fancy animations. It means that I can build really solid professional websites that serve your purpose, serve your product, know how to communicate, know how to sell your product, basically. And it's going to work well and it's going to be good. And it's not going to be, you know, I really don't like adding things that are unnecessary. Things like really fancy animated buttons that, take a lot of time and energy to develop, and they don't really help the project or the website at all. I mean, not at all, but um, for the most part. So, anyways, that's my 10 minutes on being a web designer. And yeah, so happy Thursday.